February 23, 1945, Mount Suribachi, Iwo Jima. Private First Class. Tadashi Yamamoto crouched inside a concrete bunker carved into black volcanic rock. The air was thick with smoke and dust. His hands shook as he raised his rifle toward the firing slit. Through it, he watched American Marines advance. They came forward under machine gun fire that should have cut them down. One Marine fell, then another. The rest kept moving. Grenades exploded in the sand. A flamethrower roared somewhere to his left. The ground itself seemed to burn. Yamamoto watched a Marine throw himself onto a grenade to shield the men behind him. The blast tore his body apart, and still the attack did not stop. Within minutes, Marines were at the bunker's entrance. That night, by the light of a dying candle, Yamamoto wrote words that he knew would mean death if discovered. "The Marines are not human. They do not die like other men. Everything we were told was a lie." For Yamamoto, and for thousands of Japanese soldiers across the Pacific, something terrifying had become clear. They were not fighting an enemy who knew when to stop. Before the war, Japanese soldiers were taught a simple truth: Americans were weak. They came from a soft, democratic society that valued comfort over sacrifice. They were individualistic, undisciplined, incapable of enduring hardship for long. Japanese military doctrine insisted that such men might fight fiercely at first, but would break once the cost became too high. This belief was not accidental. It was reinforced at every level of training. Japanese soldiers were taught that spiritual strength mattered more than machines, that willpower could overcome material disadvantage, that an army prepared to die without hesitation would always defeat one that valued survival. Bushido was more than philosophy, it was doctrine. Japanese troops were trained to endure hunger, exhaustion, and fear without complaint. They were taught that death in battle was honorable and surrender unthinkable. This was not merely propaganda. It was lived experience in China, where Japanese forces had often defeated enemies through aggression and psychological shock. Night attacks, sudden assaults, relentless pressure. These methods had worked before. American troops, Japanese intelligence believed, would respond differently. They would hesitate. They would withdraw. They would crumble when faced with an enemy willing to die. And for a time, the evidence seemed to support the theory. Early American defeats in the Philippines reinforced Japanese confidence. Reports described chaos, surrender, retreat. To Japanese planners, it confirmed what they already knew. When the Marines finally appeared in force in the Pacific, they were expected to behave the same way. They did not. August 1942, Guadalcanal. For the Imperial Japanese Army, this island was supposed to be a lesson, not a battle. Japanese commanders expected inexperienced American troops to collapse once night fell. Darkness had always belonged to Japan. Night attacks were a weapon. Confusion, fear, and sudden violence had broken enemies before. On Guadalcanal, those tactics were used again. And they failed. When Japanese infantry advanced through the jungle after dark, they did not find panicked soldiers or abandoned positions. They found Marines waiting, dug in, alert, ready. Machine guns opened fire with precise overlapping fields. Flares burst overhead, turning night into daylight. When Japanese units attempted to regroup, Marines did something no doctrine predicted. They counterattacked. Small Marine units moved forward into the darkness, firing as they advanced. They closed the distance. They fought at night as if they owned it. Japanese officers recorded their disbelief in diaries later recovered from the battlefield. One wrote that the Americans attacked as if darkness gave them strength rather than fear. Again and again, Japanese assaults failed to break Marine lines. When positions were overrun, Marines fought hand to hand. When ammunition ran out, they used bayonets. When officers fell, non-commissioned officers took command without hesitation. Losses mounted. By dawn, Japanese companies that had entered the jungle with confidence were reduced to fragments. Units that had defeated larger forces in China found themselves halted by men who refused to yield ground, even when surrounded. What disturbed Japanese commanders most was not Marine firepower, it was Marine behavior. Casualties that should have shattered morale did not. Wounded men stayed in position. Fallen Marines were replaced instantly by others who stepped forward without orders. The expected moment of collapse never came. Guadalcanal was not a defeat that Japan could explain away, it was a warning. The enemy they faced did not fight the way they were supposed to, and worse, this was only the beginning. After Guadalcanal, Japanese commanders tried to explain away what they had seen. They blamed terrain, weather, bad luck, but the reports kept coming. Across the Pacific, officers recorded the same observations in battle after battle. Marines did not retreat when surrounded. They did not surrender when positions became hopeless. Casualties that should have ended an attack did not slow it down. One intelligence summary noted that Marine units continued advancing even after losing half their strength. Another warned that inflicting losses did not reduce Marine combat effectiveness until a unit was physically destroyed. These were not emotional reactions. They were professional assessments. For the first time, Japanese planners began to doubt the assumptions they had carried into the war. If American troops were supposed to collapse under pressure, why were these men doing the opposite? More disturbing still was what happened after Marines took casualties. Other armies paused, reorganized, rebuilt. The Marines did not. Attacks resumed within hours. Units were reinforced. Positions were assaulted again, sometimes the same day. Japanese defenders who believed they had broken an enemy attack found the enemy returning before defenses could be repaired. This behavior did more than cost lives. It shattered confidence. Japanese officers began warning subordinates that Marines could not be fought like other enemies. Traditional expectations no longer applied. Familiar rules no longer worked. What had once been certainty turned into unease, and beneath that unease lay a growing realization. If Marines could absorb punishment without breaking, then the war Japan expected to fight no longer existed. As Japanese intelligence officers searched for explanations, their attention turned away from the battlefield and toward American training camps. Captured documents, interrogations, and battlefield observations all pointed to the same conclusion. The Marines were not fighting this way by accident. Japanese officers who questioned captured Marines were unsettled by what they heard. American boot camp, they learned, was deliberately designed to destroy the civilian identity of recruits. Men were pushed past exhaustion, humiliated, broken down physically and psychologically, then rebuilt. Recruits were taught that quitting was disgraceful, that surrender was unacceptable, that their individual lives mattered less than the unit beside them. The transformation was systematic, not symbolic. To Japanese observers, this sounded disturbingly familiar. It resembled their own methods: harsh discipline, relentless pressure, absolute obedience. Marines, they realized, were trained to endure suffering almost as completely as Japanese soldiers. But there was a difference. Marine training did not end with endurance. It created initiative. Recruits were taught to think under fire, to act independently when orders failed, to advance without waiting for a permission. Obedience mattered, but momentum mattered more. Japanese officers recognized the danger immediately. They had expected Americans to lack the will to die. Instead, they faced soldiers who were just as willing to die, but trained to keep moving forward while doing it. One intelligence officer summarized the problem bluntly. The Marines had taken Japanese concepts of sacrifice and discipline and removed the limits. This realization forced an uncomfortable truth into the open. Japanese courage was no longer unique, and against an enemy trained to endure pain, fear, and loss without hesitation, the psychological advantage Japan had relied on for decades was slipping away. By late 1943, Japanese commanders were no longer asking if Marines could be stopped. They were asking how much blood it would cost to delay them. What they were discovering was deeply unsettling. Marine attacks did not slow when casualties mounted. They accelerated. Positions Japanese doctrine classified as impregnable were assaulted directly. Bunkers were attacked head-on. Hills were crossed in daylight under machine gun fire. Platoons lost a third of their men in minutes and kept moving. To Japanese officers, this behavior seemed irrational. In their doctrine, casualties were something to be minimized, carefully weighed against the objective. Even soldiers trained to die for the emperor were not meant to be expended carelessly. The Marines calculated differently. Casualties were not a failure, they were a cost. If the objective mattered, the price was paid immediately. Japanese defenders learned this lesson again and again. Killing Marines did not stop attacks. It only brought more Marines forward. When a squad was destroyed, another replaced it. When an assault failed, it was repeated with more firepower, more men, and more urgency. One Japanese officer described watching a Marine platoon cross open ground swept by machine guns. 7 men fell in seconds. The survivors reached the bunker and destroyed it. Within minutes, the position was gone. The entire attack lasted less than 5 minutes. To Japanese defenders, this was terrifying, not because it was reckless, but because it was deliberate. Marine commanders accepted casualty rates that would have forced other armies to halt. They understood that speed saved lives in the long run. The faster a position fell, the fewer days their men would spend dying in front of it. This logic created an impossible dilemma for Japanese commanders. Defend lightly, and Marines overran the position immediately. Defend heavily, and Marines destroyed the position at terrible cost, weakening defenses elsewhere. Every option led to defeat. The only variable was timing. By accepting losses without hesitation, the Marines removed Japan's most reliable defensive weapon, the hope that killing enough attackers would make them stop. It never did. As Japanese commanders studied Marine behavior, one pattern appeared again and again. The Marines moved faster, not just in advance, but in decision-making. Japanese doctrine centralized authority. Decisions flowed downward from officers. Orders were precise, deliberate, and slow to change once issued. This system valued control and coordination, but it struggled in chaos. The Marines fought differently. Authority did not stop at the officer level. Sergeants and corporals were expected to make decisions on their own. If a plan failed, they did not wait for new orders. They adapted immediately. When a bunker halted in advance, a Marine squad leader did not withdraw to report. He maneuvered around it. When a platoon commander fell, the next man stepped forward without hesitation. Radios linked small units directly to artillery, tanks, and naval gunfire. Japanese defenders often realized they were being outflanked only after Marines were already behind them. This speed was devastating. By the time Japanese officers understood where the main attack was coming from, Marines had already shifted their axis of advance. Positions prepared for one direction were bypassed. Carefully planned kill zones were rendered irrelevant in minutes. Japanese reports noted that Marine assaults seemed disorganized until it became clear that the disorder was flexibility. The Marines did not need perfect plans. They needed momentum. Every delay favored the defender. Every pause gave Japanese forces time to reposition, reinforce, and prepare counterattacks. Marine doctrine eliminated those pauses. Pressure was constant. Day attacks followed by night patrols, artillery fire that prevented rest, small unit probes that kept defenders awake and uncertain. There was no safe moment to recover. Japanese forces had been trained to dominate the night and regroup after daylight battles. Against the Marines, that rhythm vanished. The fighting never stopped. One Japanese officer later explained the difference simply. By the time we understood what the Marines were doing, they had already done it. For Japanese commanders, the most disturbing realization came slowly. The Marines were not just aggressive, they were inexhaustible. Every Marine attack was supported by a level of firepower Japanese forces could not match or replace. Artillery fired hundreds of shells to neutralize a single position. Tanks advanced with flamethrowers to burn defenders out of bunkers. Naval guns from destroyers and battleships erased entire hillsides when resistance persisted. If one method failed, another followed immediately. This was not bravery replacing firepower. It was firepower applied without hesitation. Japanese defenders fought with rifles, light machine guns, and limited mortars. Ammunition was precious. Every round fired mattered. Every weapon lost was gone forever. The Marines fought with the resources of an entire industrial nation. If artillery was needed, it arrived. If tanks were required, they rolled forward. If air support was called, it appeared overhead within minutes. Positions that had taken months to construct could be destroyed in hours. Japanese officers watching these assaults understood something terrifying. They were not fighting men alone. They were fighting factories, shipyards, railroads, oil fields, assembly lines thousands of miles away. This imbalance changed the nature of every battle. Japanese defenders fought from fixed positions with no hope of reinforcement. Supplies dwindled, ammunition ran low, wounded men could not be evacuated. Every loss weakened the defense permanently. Marine casualties, by contrast, triggered response, not collapse. More ships arrived, more men landed, more guns opened fire. The longer a battle lasted, the stronger the Marines became. What Japanese doctrine had once celebrated, endurance, sacrifice, fighting to the last man, now worked against them. Each day of resistance consumed irreplaceable resources. Each day favored the Americans. By mid-1944, Japanese planners no longer spoke of stopping Marine assaults. They spoke only of delaying them. Industrial warfare had turned courage into arithmetic, and the numbers were not on Japan's side. Japanese patrols sent to observe Marine positions reported something they could not understand. The Marines were not exhausted. Days after landing under fire, they were eating hot meals. Ammunition was stacked in supply dumps. Medical tents operated behind the lines. Trucks moved constantly, carrying food, water, and replacement equipment. For Japanese soldiers accustomed to fighting on shrinking rations, this was demoralizing. They expected American forces to weaken after days of continuous combat, as Japanese units would have. Instead, they found an enemy growing stronger. Wounded Marines were evacuated within minutes. Blood plasma, antibiotics, and surgery saved men who would have died in Japanese service. Those men did not simply survive. They returned. Japanese wounded often had no such chance. Medical supplies were scarce. Evacuation was impossible. Infections killed men who had survived the initial wound. Every casualty reduced fighting strength permanently. This difference mattered more than bravery or doctrine. Marines fought knowing that if they were hit, they would be treated, evacuated, replaced if necessary. The system absorbed loss and continued functioning. Japanese defenders fought knowing that every wound might be a death sentence. The contrast extended beyond medicine. Fresh troops rotated into the line. Units pulled back briefly, then returned. Ammunition never ran out. Artillery never fell silent. The longer Marines fought, the more confident they became. The longer Japanese forces fought, the closer they came to collapse. This was the final piece of the puzzle. The Marines did not weaken because they were not designed to endure alone. They were designed to be sustained. By the time the war reached Iwo Jima, one Japanese general understood what others still refused to accept. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had studied the Marines closely. He read after-action reports from Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. He spoke with officers who had survived fighting them. His conclusion was blunt. The Marines could not be stopped. They could only be delayed. Kuribayashi rejected the tactics that had destroyed Japanese forces elsewhere. No banzai charges, no suicidal counterattacks meant to inspire spirit, but achieved nothing. Those methods wasted lives without slowing the American advance. Instead, he prepared for a different kind of battle. Kuribayashi ordered his men underground. Miles of tunnels were carved into volcanic rock. Bunkers were positioned to support one another with interlocking fields of fire. Every beach, ridge, and approach was pre-registered for artillery and mortar fire. The goal was no longer victory, it was attrition. Kuribayashi understood that killing Marines would not break their will, but he believed that inflicting enough casualties might slow them, might force hesitation, might buy time for Japan. In private letters, he acknowledged the reality his soldiers were about to face. They would fight bravely, they would die in place, and the Marines would still take the island. Kuribayashi did not promise his men survival, he promised purpose. Every day of resistance would matter. Every Marine killed would matter. Delay itself became the objective. It was a strategy born not of hope, but of clarity. Kuribayashi had accepted what the war had become, and he was preparing to prove it in blood. February 19, 1945. When the first waves of Marines hit the beaches of Iwo Jima, nothing happened. No machine gun fire, no artillery, no resistance. For a brief moment, some believed Kuribayashi's defenses had failed. Then, the island erupted. Mortars, artillery, and machine guns opened fire at once. The black sand offered no cover. Every step forward sank men deeper into the ground. Tanks bogged down. Wounded Marines lay exposed, unable to move. Within minutes, casualties numbered in the thousands. Yet the Marines did not withdraw. They reorganized under fire. Units reformed where they fell. Engineers cleared paths through minefields while shells exploded around them. Riflemen advanced one crater at a time. Kuribayashi's defenses worked exactly as intended. Every bunker was connected by tunnels. Positions destroyed in the morning were reoccupied by afternoon. Marines who believed they had cleared an area were fired upon from behind. The fighting became intimate, brutal, personal. Flamethrower teams moved forward knowing they were prime targets. Demolition charges were carried by hand into firing ports. Marines died inches from bunker entrances, and the next man stepped forward without pause. Casualties mounted day after day. Entire companies were reduced to half strength. Platoons disappeared. Replacement Marines landed and were sent directly into the line, sometimes within hours of arriving on the island. Still, the advance continued. Japanese defenders fought exactly as Kuribayashi had ordered. No banzai charges, no wasted lives. Every shot aimed to kill, every Marine death counted, but even this could not change the outcome. For every Marine killed, another took his place. For every position destroyed, artillery moved closer. For every day of resistance, American firepower increased. By the end of the battle, nearly every Japanese defender was dead. The Marines had suffered staggering losses, more than in any other battle of the Pacific War. Yet, the island was taken. Iwo Jima proved what Japanese officers had feared since Guadalcanal. Against Marines, courage and preparation could only determine how long a battle lasted, not how it ended. After the war, Japanese officers were questioned by their captors. Many spoke carefully, some with bitterness, others with a clarity that only defeat can bring. Again and again, the same conclusion emerged. The Marines had not been feared because they were cruel, or because they ignored death. They were feared because they combined two things Japan had believed could never coexist: spirit and supply. Japanese soldiers had been taught that courage decided battles, that moral strength outweighed material weakness, that an army willing to die would always defeat one that valued survival. The Marines shattered that belief. They fought with the same willingness to die, but without accepting defeat as the price of courage. They did not glorify death. They used it only when necessary, supported by firepower that ensured it was never wasted. Japanese officers admitted that they had prepared to fight men. Instead, they had fought a system, an army designed not just to endure losses, but to absorb them, replace them, and continue forward without pause. One former officer summarized the realization simply. "We were not fighting soldiers," he said. "We were fighting the future." Against such an enemy, bravery alone was not enough. Discipline alone was not enough. Even sacrifice lost its meaning when the opponent could afford it endlessly. The Marines did not win because they were fearless. They won because fear no longer mattered. In the end, the Japanese did not lose because they lacked courage. They lost because courage was no longer enough. For decades, Japanese military thought had been built around a single belief: that spirit could overcome anything. That discipline, sacrifice, and the willingness to die would decide the outcome of war. Against the Marines, that belief collapsed. The Japanese had prepared to fight men who feared death. Instead, they faced men who accepted it, backed by a nation that refused to be exhausted. The Marines did not fight alone. They fought with ships that never stopped arriving, with factories that never stopped producing, with medics, engineers, and replacements that ensured the fight continued no matter the cost. By the time Japanese leaders fully understood this, it was already too late. The future of warfare had arrived on black sand beaches and jungle ridgelines, and it could not be stopped by bravery alone. The men who faced the Marines understood this first. They learned it in bunkers and tunnels, in night attacks that failed, in defenses that held and were destroyed anyway. And when the war ended, many admitted a quiet truth. They had not been defeated by monsters. They had been defeated by an army built for a new kind of war.